Chapter 20, Section 1 continued. We had just talking about Hawaii and how we were able to gain control of Hawaii. Part of the reason that we wanted Hawaii was because it was an important stopping point on the way to China. So we need to talk now about our trade over there in Asia. Our trade in China goes back to 1784. That is when we began trading in China. In 1843, China is going to make the decision to open 5 ports to trade with the United States and Europe. And basically from that point on, China is going to struggle to keep foreign interests from overrunning the country. In 1895, China is going to face a new threat. Japan. Japan is going to attack and defeat China and take over part of China's territory. It is at this point in time that a number of European countries are going to quickly take advantage of a weakened China. And you are going to see spheres of influence carved out in China. A sphere of influence is a region where a particular country has exclusive rights over mines, railroads, and trade. And these countries were mainly Britain, France, Germany, and Russia. On the European side, you also have Japan over there as well. And as you look at this, the country that looks to be left out by all of this is us. Where's our slice? We didn't necessarily want to take over part of China, but we wanted to be able to trade with China. And if Russia, Germany, Britain, France, and also Japan are taking over areas, they may keep us from trading with those areas of China. So Henry Cabot Lodge, I'm a congressman, is basically going to come out and say, hey, we're not asking for any special favors here. We just want a market that we're on the same terms as the rest of the world. And if we're being shut out of these spheres, we're not. So in 1899, John Hay, our Secretary of State, is going to call for an open door policy. An open door policy where all nations will be given equal access to trade and investments in China. And Hay is going to send some open door notes to these European powers and to Japan. And he's going to ask them to agree on 3 principles. 1, keep all ports in their spheres open to all nations. Second one, Chinese officials should be allowed to collect all tariffs and duties. And the third one, guarantee equal harbor, railroad, and tariff rates to everybody. These were his open door notes. This is what he was asking the European powers in Japan to agree to. Nobody responds back to John Hay. Nobody says they disagree. Nobody says they agree. So John Hay announces that the open door policy is approved. Nobody said they weren't going to do it, so it is approved. In China, there's going to be a growing resentment of foreigners. And there's going to be a secret society that forms called the Fists of Righteous Harmony. They were also known as boxers from where they worked in these box factories. And the Fists of Righteous Harmony is going to blame foreigners, missionaries, for all these troubles in China. And some of these issues were caused by the foreigners in China. But they went so far as to say, say it doesn't rain for a while. Well, that's these foreigners and missionaries' fault because their Christianity is disrespectful to the Chinese gods, and so they're not allowing it to rain. And heaven will send soldiers down to clean the foreigners out of China. In the spring of 1900, you're going to have the Boxer Rebellion. And Boxers are going to attack the missionaries and foreigners, the traders in China, killing more than 200. And this wasn't something that China could just say was this rogue element, because some of the government officials in China supported this rebellion. And the Boxers are going to start to lay siege to the fortified foreign settlements in Beijing. And the foreign countries, many of them European, are going to send troops to rescue their people. But this isn't like today where you hop on a plane. After about 8 weeks of this rebellion, the foreigners are rescued. John Hay sees this whole thing go down and is afraid that the foreign countries are going to use the Boxer Rebellion as an excuse to take more land in China. And so he pressures the other countries, keep the open door. Let China rule themselves. And China is going to be allowed to keep their sovereignty. But they are going to be forced to pay $333 million in damages, of which $25 million was given to us for damages to our stuff in China, but we give back actually $17 million of it to China and told them to use it for education in China. We'll now switch gears and talk about Japan and what's happening over there. We weren't just wanting to trade with China, we're also wanting to trade with Japan. Japan was an imperial power, as evidenced by the fact that they went and took over parts of China, which is pretty impressive considering it was only in 1854 that Japan ended their isolation from the world. In 1854, Commodore Matthew Perry is going to persuade Japan to open up to trade. Matthew Perry goes on a cruise with some warships around the world, and he's going to sail into Edo, which is today Tokyo. When he sails into Edo, he's going to come ashore with others as well. They're going to come ashore and they present gifts to the rulers of Japan. They present a telegraph transmitter and a model train to a country that really didn't have much experience with the outside world at all. These were pretty impressive gifts. And Perry is going to ask Japan if they would like to start trading with us. And Japan agrees, because Japan's afraid that if they don't agree, they're going to be taken over. Remember, Perry sailed into Edo with 7 warships. So now that Japan has opened up to the rest of the world, they're not going to horse around. Japan quickly is going to become an industrial power. Japan's going to build up their army. Japan's going to build up their navy. It isn't long before Japan and Russia are rivals for Chinese territory. They both have interest in certain parts of Manchuria. In February of 1904, Japan is going to attack the Russians in Manchuria. This is particularly impressive because this is 50 years after they had opened up to trade. They were now powerful enough to actually attack Russian troops. This is going to be the Russo-Japanese War. Now, as we sit there, the United States sits there and sees this war break out. Our president at this time was Teddy Roosevelt, and he's worried. He's worried here. There's two ways this works out. On one hand, Russia wins. If Russia wins, they may stop us from trading in Manchuria. That's not good. That's not acceptable to us. On the other hand, Japan wins. If Japan wins and becomes even more powerful, they could threaten free trade in all of Asia. So as we're sitting here and we look at these two options, none of them are good. May 1905, Japan's going to ask us to negotiate peace with Russia. This is our chance now to make sure this doesn't end badly for us. Roosevelt is going to have the two sides come together in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. And Roosevelt is going to help negotiate a treaty between Japan and Russia. Actually, for his work here, Roosevelt's actually going to be awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. But looking at all this, Japan was now on the scene. They were a modern world power. They were rivaling us for influence in China, in all of the Pacific. And Roosevelt's concerned about Japan's growing power. And Roosevelt wants to kind of remind Japan of our military might. So in 1907, Roosevelt's going to send out the Great White Fleet. 4 destroyers, 16 battleships, all painted this brilliant white, are going to go on a 46,000-mile cruise around the world. And they're going to make sure that one of their stops is going to be in Japan. Just as a reminder on who